Snowflakes clung stubbornly to the window panes of La Bella Notte, the Italian restaurant tucked into a narrow street in downtown Toronto. Inside, the air was warm with the smell of garlic, basil, and freshly baked bread. Friday nights were always busy. Couples dressed in their best coats leaned across candlelit tables, their whispers blending with the clink of wine glasses. Businessmen closed deals over veal marsala. Groups of friends laughed loudly, shaking off the weight of another winter week. And then there was me, Elena Morgan. At 26, I had already mastered the subtle dance of caring for plates balanced on my arms, while smiling as if my whole life depended on tips. Because, in a way, it did. The rent for my tiny studio near Queen Street wasn't forgiving, and neither were the student loans I was still paying off. My degree in criminal psychology, the thing I'd once thought would get me a job in law enforcement, had instead taught me how to read people. That skill helped me spot whether a guest was a lousy tipper or someone about to start a drunken fight. But lately, it had done something else. It had made me uneasy about one particular customer. "Table 12 wants you again, Ellie," Carmen whispered, sliding past me with a tray of desserts. Her laugh was low and mischievous. She was my best friend at the restaurant, the one who always knew everyone's gossip. "Your mysterious Italian is waiting." I glanced across the room. There he was, Antonio Bellucci. For 3 months, every Friday night without fail, he had walked through the heavy oak doors of La Bella Notte and claimed the corner table, near the back wall. Always the same suit, custom fitted, dark, expensive. Always the same bottle of Barolo wine. Always alone. And always requesting me as his server. It should have flattered me. Most waitresses would kill for a customer who tipped well and looked like he'd stepped off the cover of GQ. But Antonio set off alarm bells in my head. Not the loud ones that scream danger, though. Maybe that too, but the quiet, whispering kind that suggests secrets. He had the controlled stillness of a predator. The way his storm gray eyes swept the room in repeating patterns. The way he always sat with his back to the wall. The way his expensive watch ticked down seconds, like he was waiting for something to happen. My psychology training whispered that he wasn't just another rich businessman. And tonight, something felt off. I noticed it around 10:30 p.m. when a man in a charcoal suit slid into table 8. At first glance, he looked like the typical Bay Street banker crowd we saw all the time. But something was wrong. He ordered 3 drinks in an hour and touched none of them. His shoulders were stiff. His eyes flicked constantly toward Antonio's table. And every few minutes he checked his watch like he was counting down. That wasn't leisure. That was surveillance. At the bar, another man sat nursing the same whiskey for 45 minutes. His shoes gleamed a kind of Italian leather that cost more than my rent. He had a perfect view of both the front entrance and the corridor leading to the kitchen. His hand kept tugging at his jacket as if concealing something heavy underneath. And then there was the third man, younger, jittery, positioned at the small table near the restrooms the route staff used to exit in. Incidentally, the route Antonio always took when he left. He couldn't keep still, tapping his thigh, adjusting silverware, checking his phone every 30 seconds. My heart tightened. All 3 of them were positioned like chess pieces. Angles of attack, exit routes, timelines, the kind of coordination I'd studied in case files. Not in a restaurant dining room, Elena. Earth to Elena. Carmen's elbow nudged me back into the moment. "Your guy's waiting for his wine." I forced a smile, grabbed the familiar bottle of Barolo from the shelf, and headed toward table 12. Antonio looked up as I approached. He was 6'2" of controlled power wrapped in bespoke wool. His tie knotted with military precision. His presence filled the corner of the room like gravity itself bent toward him. "Good evening, Miss Morgan," he said, his accent thick but hard to place Italian. Yes, but with something sharper underneath. Even a simple request sounded like a command. "Your usual?" My voice didn't shake, though inside I was buzzing with unease. He nodded once. As I poured the wine, my peripheral vision caught the man at table 8 lifting his phone. He murmured softly, almost inaudible, but I caught fragments. 23:45. Back exit. Everything's in position. My blood went cold. 23:45. Exactly 15 minutes from now. The back exit. The one Antonio always used. I set the bottle down carefully, pretending to adjust the silverware. My hands trembled so hard I almost dropped the corkscrew. I had two choices: ignore it, finish my shift, go home to my unpaid bills, or say something and risk dragging myself into a nightmare I couldn't escape. I leaned closer, lowering my voice so only Antonio could hear. "I might be wrong," I whispered, my throat tight, "but you should stay quiet and not move. Something is planned for 11:45. His hand froze on the stem of his wine glass. Gray eyes sharpened, locking on mine with a focus that made the rest of the restaurant disappear. "Explain," he said. The word was so low it was almost a growl. I swallowed hard. 3 men, one at table 8, one at the bar, one by the restrooms. Coordinated positioning, pre-action anxiety. "They've been watching you all night." I heard one say back exit. Everything in position. The mask of casual elegance slipped. In its place, something coiled and dangerous flickered across his features. "You're certain?" "No," I admitted, my pulse racing. "But everything about them screams surveillance. And whatever happens, it's supposed to be in 15 minutes. For a long heartbeat." Antonio didn't move. Then, slowly, deliberately, he reached into his jacket. My breath caught until he withdrew not a weapon, but a phone. His fingers tapped quickly, then he set it face down beside his plate. "Done," he said simply. I frowned. "What's done?" The corner of his mouth curved in the ghost of a smile. Sharp and predatory. Insurance. I didn't know it yet, but in the next few minutes, my entire life would change. Because when the clock struck 23:45, Antonio Bellucci would prove exactly who he was, and I would discover that one whispered warning had tethered me forever to his world. For a second after I said it, "Stay quiet, don't move," the restaurant kept humming like nothing had happened. Cutlery chimed. Someone laughed too loud near the window. A violin track drifted from the hidden speakers, syrupy and slow. La Bella not put on its usual Friday night mask, and if you didn't know better, you'd think nothing lethal could bloom in a place that smelled like butter and rosemary. But I did know better. Antonio didn't look at his phone again after that single message. He only lifted the glass, tasted the Barolo as if he were alone, then set it down with a precision that made a shiver skate up my spine. His eyes were different, no longer the polite, cool gray of a charming stranger. They'd gone storm dark, focused the way a lens tightens before the shot is taken. "Stay by me," he said, not loud, not gentle. Instruction, not invitation. I didn't get the chance to answer. The man at table 8's posture changed by a millimeter, barely enough for a casual observer to catch. But when you've studied pre-action tells, you learn to respect tiny changes. His shoulders softened, as if he'd finally decided something. Decision leads to movement. Movement leads to the quaver of a spoon against porcelain cut off mid-clink. The whiskey at the bar stopped halfway to a mouth. Somewhere near the restrooms, a chair leg scraped. Time stretched thin as pulled sugar dot, and then La Bella not developed blind spots. They didn't come from the front door. They didn't stride through the kitchen. 3 men appeared the way shadows condense when light shifts. One near the host stand, another gliding past the bar with a folded napkin he didn't need, a third strolling in from the corridor as if he'd always been there. Nothing about them screamed security. No earpieces, no bulges, no dramatic black suits. Just well-cut jackets, quiet shoes, faces you'd forget if you weren't looking for them, which apparently I had not been. "Good evening," said the man passing the bar, soft, friendly, smiling at the bartender as if ordering a second round. In the next breath, the smile was gone, the friendly was gone, and the barstool man's wrist was pinned to the mahogany in a joint lock so clean. I barely saw it happen. A glint of metal flashed and vanished into a linen napkin. Table 8 stood. He didn't get far. Napkin man's friend, the one by the host stand, collided with him like an accident you couldn't have predicted, except you could. Into steps and a turn. Charcoal suit was face first into his own untouched martini, the glass skidding and bursting against the marble with a delicate pop. His phone tumbled, skittered, caught by a polished shoe before it could sing a telltale tone. Near the restrooms, the jittery one made the only smart move he had left. He bolted. "Don't," Antonio murmured, almost to himself. I don't know how the third shadow got there so fast. One moment the corridor gaped, the next it was full of a tall, quiet man who didn't bother to run. He simply stepped, angled, met jittery mid-sprint, and guided him neatly into the wall with a thud that made the light fixtures tremble. Around us, the Friday night crowd reacted exactly how you'd expect the Friday night crowd to react. When they have no idea they're sharing space with people who carry contingency plans like cufflinks. A few heads turned, brows knit. Someone lifted a phone for a photo of what they thought was a drunk being escorted out. The violin track swelled obliviously, tripping over an old Italian love song. "Walk," Antonio said. He rose, the chair legs barely whispering against the floor, and the force field around him became gravity. I moved because he moved, because not moving felt suddenly like stepping into traffic. When his hand found the small of my back, it wasn't intimate. It was directional. He didn't push. He didn't need to. The message was simple: left, past table 10. Keep your gaze soft, don't run. We threaded the aisles. Carmen looked up from a table of 4, confusion tightening her mouth. I wanted to say "I'll call you," wanted to mouth "I'm fine," but the words stuck behind my teeth. She took in Antonio, the controlled urgency, the napkin man casually escorting Whiskey Shoes toward the staff corridor, and her eyes widened just enough to tell me she understood exactly nothing, and far too much at the same time. The front door opened. Not for us. A black sedan idled at the curb beyond the frosted glass, its headlights washing the snow into glitter. The host, a kid with careful hair and a tie he kept touching when nervous, looked between the sedan and Antonio and decided, on some animal level, not to ask questions. We reached the entry, and Antonio didn't slow. He didn't tug on my arm. He just let the world part for him. In the space between door and car, winter slapped me awake, cold, clean air, salt grit underfoot. The streets hush at odds with the storm inside my chest. The rear door yawned open. "Get in," he said. Every documentary, every cautionary tale I'd absorbed flickered like warning signs. Cars like this don't drive you home. Cars like this are endings. But a minute ago, I'd watched a man get folded into a wall like a syllable in the wrong sentence. I'd heard back "exit" and 2345. I'd told this dangerous man not to move. And now I was the one moving, because some part of me already understood. The moment I whispered that warning, I crossed a line I couldn't uncross. I slid in, leather and shadow, and the faint citrus of a cologne that felt expensive enough to have a grandfather. Antonio followed, not close, not touching, but filling the space in a way that didn't require touch. The door shut with a thud that sounded like a period. Home, he told the driver. Home, apparently, was a language with different definitions. We pulled away as two police cruisers ghosted past. Lights off, probably answering a noise complaint to blocks over. The city smeared into streaks. King Street to University. University to a ramp that lifted us into a skein of highway. Antonio made a call in Italian. A soft string of syllables that ended with a name I didn't recognize and a tone I did handled. I stared out the window, watching Toronto become geometry, the CN Tower a needle-piercing low clouds, the lake a dark sheet beyond the spill of sodium vapor. In the glass reflection, my face looked calm. My body told another story, a tremor in the hands, shallow breaths I had to count back into order, the hot cold waves of adrenaline curdling into questions. What happens now? I asked, surprised my voice belonged to me. Now, he said, we discuss why you noticed what trained men hoped you would not. I turned. I studied patterns, criminal psychology. People broadcast more than they think. Your watchers were out of rhythm. They forgot to breathe like diners, a beat of silence. Then unexpected brava. Praise shouldn't feel like complication. It did. The elevator to the penthouse was keycarded, mirrored, quiet. My reflection beside his made us look like a couple out too late. Except my eyes were too wide, and his were not wide enough. When the doors opened, the kind of wealth I'd previously only seen through a screen spilled out floor-to-ceiling windows, blistered with city lights, marble that made my sneakers sound wrong, art that didn't require signatures because the frames did the talking. Two men at the far end straightened when we entered, not in the stiff, obvious way of amateurs, in the minimal shift of professionals whose job is to be furniture, until they must be weather. A woman appeared from the kitchen in a charcoal sheath dress, her black hair pinned into an effortless architecture. No restaurant worker ever has time to learn. "Ms. Morgan," she said, voice cool as a skating rink. "I'm Sophia Russo. We've set up a guest room. Your manager has been informed you came down with food poisoning and will be out 3 days." I blinked. I told him you were resting." A pause. "You will be." None of this was a request. Antonio shrugged out of his coat and handed it to nobody, because nobody materialized to take it at exactly the right moment. He didn't ask if I wanted coffee, tea, a chair. He didn't apologize for the fact that my life was now a chess piece on his board. He only looked at me as if measuring a distance I couldn't see. "You saved my life," he said. My laugh scraped. "I told you not to stand up. You named the hour, the door, the shape of what waited." He tilted his head. "You also named yourself." It took me a heartbeat to understand. By stepping into his world, by making myself legible to his enemies, the girl who warned him I had painted a target where there hadn't been one. Sophia must have read my face, because she spoke, gentle enough to be jarring. "Ms. Morgan, Mr. Bellucci's enemies will conclude you're aligned with him. That changes risk calculations." "I'm a waitress," I said, "with a degree I don't use." Sophia's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Tonight you used it." A phone chimed from the office beyond a muted, expensive sound. Antonio turned, listened, said nothing. When he faced me again, the storm was back under glass, controlled, a weather system tamed. "The man who ordered table 8, he said. "The man at the bar. The one in the corridor. They were not alone, and they were not the point." What was the point? Timing, testing. He let the words sit. "Bait?" I thought of 2345, of the back exit, of the way the room had shifted when my whisper changed its story. "For you," I said, "or for whoever would come when you were gone." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Sophia stepped aside, revealing a hallway of closed doors, each one a boundary with a lock more expensive than my monthly rent. "Rest," she said softly. "Questions will be clearer in the morning." They always are. I almost told her that wasn't how questions work, that darkness breeds possibilities the sun can't disinfect. But my legs chose before my pride did. I followed her past abstract canvases and a vase that looked like it had a Wikipedia page. In the doorway, I paused. If I hadn't said anything, what would have happened? Sophia considered me the way surgeons consider a risky incision. Men like Mr. Bellucci do not believe in counterfactuals, only outcomes. The city beyond the glass looked like stars had fallen and decided to live as office lights. I lowered myself to the edge of a bed that felt too soft to carry the weight I'd brought with me, and stared at my hands until they steadied, below the hum of air vents and the far-off siren sweep. I could still hear the napkin slide across a weapon. I could still hear the glass burst like a tiny, elegant gunshot. I could still hear my own whisper, and how easily it had rewritten the next 15 minutes of the night. What I couldn't hear yet, what I wasn't ready to hear, was the other thing underneath it all. The first note of a tether snapping taut between me and a man whose life came with exit routes, mapped into every room. I lay back, eyes open to the ceiling's pale geometry, and let the question I'd been avoiding sit on my chest until it was hard to breathe. What happens to a girl who tells a wolf to stay? Somewhere down the hall, a door closed softly. Somewhere inside my ribcage, a door opened that didn't know how to shut. And somewhere in Toronto, a clock rolled past midnight, into a day where my name would mean something to strangers I didn't want to meet. The ride from La Bella Not to wherever Antonio was taking me didn't last long, but it stretched like a lifetime. Toronto's late-night streets blurred by, neon signs half buried in snow, steam rising from subway grates, a handful of taxis prowling for fares. I clutched my apron in my lap, my breath fogging the tinted window, wondering how I had gone from pouring wine to running with men who snapped bones without blinking. The sedan slipped into the underground parking of a gleaming glass tower that scraped the winter sky. No signage, no flashy lights, just money whispering through steel and glass. The kind of place people like me only ever saw in glossy magazines at the dentist's office. The elevator swallowed us, climbing in silence, the hum so smooth I couldn't tell how fast we were moving. When the doors opened, I stepped into another world. The penthouse was all sharp lines and endless windows. Toronto's skyline spilling beneath us in cold brilliance. White marble floors reflected chandeliers that didn't belong in restaurants, only in cathedrals. Art hung on the walls, abstracts that probably cost more than my mother's entire house in Windsor. And standing at the heart of it all was Sophia Russo. She was elegance embodied, late 30s. A sheath dress in charcoal gray, black hair twisted into an effortless bun. Her eyes, dark and precise, swept over me like a scanner. I wasn't a guest. I was a problem to be categorized. "Ms. Morgan," she said, her voice calm. "Practice." Canadian English softened by a faint Italian undertone. "I'm Sophia, Mr. Bellucci's assistant. We've prepared a guest room for you. Your manager has been informed you came down with food poisoning. You won't be in for the next few days." The words hit me like a locked door. "You what? You called my job?" "I told them you needed rest," she corrected, lips curving into a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. My stomach knotted. I turned to Antonio, but he was already shrugging off his coat, moving with that same calculated ease he had in the restaurant, as if orchestrating violence. And orchestrating dinner parties were the same thing. He didn't look worried. He looked like a man who had just shifted from one chessboard to another. "This isn't necessary," I said, forcing steel into my voice. "I'm just a waitress who overheard something. I don't belong here." Antonio finally looked at me, storm gray eyes unreadable. "You saved my life tonight. That makes you part of this, whether you like it or not." I laughed, sharp and shaky. "That's not how this works." "I don't want," he cut me off. "Not with volume, but with gravity. Ricardo Torres will think you're mine now. He will assume you knew more than you should. That makes you a target. And I don't leave loose ends." The name landed heavy. Ricardo Torres. I had heard it before, whispers in criminology seminars, news clippings about shootings near Vaughan, cartel ties in Montreal. A man you didn't say out loud unless you wanted to choke on the syllables. "You think he'll come after me?" Antonio's answer was a simple, bone-deep certainty. "He already has." Sophia moved like a ghost, guiding me down a corridor lined with doors that probably hid more secrets than rooms. She opened one and gestured inside. The guest room was larger than my apartment, painted in cool blues, furnished with cashmere throws, a bed that could fit a family of 4. But it felt less like a sanctuary and more like a holding cell with a view. The closet already contained clothes in my size: sweaters, coats, shoes that fit perfectly. "How do you know my size?" I whispered. Sophia's smile never wavered. "We're very thorough in our research, Ms. Morgan." The word research made my skin crawl. How long had they been watching me? How much did Antonio know about my life before I ever poured him a glass of wine? I sat on the edge of the bed, the city lights painting fractured patterns across the carpet. My heart was still racing, my hands still shaking. I should have felt safe surrounded by walls, locked doors, guards. Instead, it felt like a cage of glass and steel, and I was the bird they had netted. Later, I wandered out to find Antonio in what looked like an office. Multiple monitors glowed with live security feeds, street corners, alleys, restaurants, highways. A web of surveillance that stretched far beyond this building. He stood before them, jacket off, tie loosened, sleeves rolled. And yet somehow he looked more dangerous dressed down than he had in his perfect suit. "Sleep well?" he asked, without turning. "Do you expect me to?" A ghost of a smile. "No, but I hoped." He turned, eyes catching mine, steady and unreadable. "Tell me, Elena, how much do you know about organized crime in Toronto?" I swallowed. "Enough to know people get hurt. Enough to know normal people stay as far away as possible. Smart policy," he said. Then, softly like a verdict, "Unfortunately, not an option for you anymore." I didn't sleep that night. Every sound in the penthouse, the hum of the elevator shaft, the distant footfalls of guards made me flinch. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Table 8's watch, the flash of a gun, the man in the corridor bolting for the exit. I had stepped into a nightmare, and I wasn't sure if Antonio Bellucci was the monster in it or the only thing keeping me alive. Either way, the truth was undeniable. I had saved a Mafia boss, and now, whether I wanted it or not, I was part of his world. Morning in the penthouse didn't feel like morning. No clatter of streetcars below, no neighbors slamming doors, no scent of burnt coffee drifting from someone else's kitchen. Just silence, broken only by the faint hum of air vents and the buzz of the city muffled through glass. 40 stories above the ground, I woke disoriented, curled on sheets so soft they felt more like silk clouds than fabric. For a moment, I almost believed I'd dreamed the whole thing. Antonio's gray eyes, the takedown in the restaurant, the sedan whisking me into the sky. But when I padded barefoot to the window and looked down at Toronto sprawled out like a miniature, the truth clawed back in. I wasn't free. I was perched in a glass cage high above the streets I used to walk. A knock at the door broke the quiet. Sophia appeared, immaculately dressed as if she hadn't slept. She carried a silver tray of coffee and croissants, the kind of breakfast that belonged in hotel suites and magazine spreads. "Good morning, Ms. Morgan," she said. "Don't call me that," I muttered. "It makes me sound like I belong here." She set the tray down with her usual efficiency, ignoring the edge in my voice. "Mr. Bellucci will see you when you're ready." I almost laughed. See me, like I was here for a meeting, not because his enemies thought I was part of his empire. I found Antonio in the office again, sleeves rolled up, scanning a wall of monitors showing streets, alleys, even the exterior of La Bella Not. He didn't turn when I stepped in. "Sleep?" he asked. "No." "Good," he said. "Sleep makes you slow." The bluntness lit a spark of anger. "I'm not one of your men, Antonio. I'm not your soldier." Finally, he turned. His gaze was sharp, but not unkind. "No, you're the girl who saw what even trained killers wanted me not to see. That makes you valuable." The word valuable landed heavy. Not safe, not innocent. Valuable. I crossed my arms. Valuable enough to be locked in a tower? Valuable enough to be alive, he countered. His tone softened, almost imperceptibly. "Ricardo won't stop. You think he'll forgive you because you're a waitress? No, he'll want to make an example. He'll come after you to hurt me." I hated that a part of me believed him. Hours stretched into days. Sophia managed my food poisoning cover story flawlessly, calling Carmen at the restaurant to assure her I'd be fine. Clothes in my size kept arriving: sweaters, jeans, even a winter coat. Everything I might need to stay, except the one thing I wanted: freedom. I tried once. The elevator required a keycard. The stairwell door was locked. Guards stationed in the lobby nodded politely when I passed, but their eyes carried the same message: "You're not leaving." When I returned, cheeks burning with humiliation, I found Antonio waiting in the lounge, a glass of whiskey in his hand, though it was barely noon. "You tried," he said simply. "Of course I tried. You can't just keep me here like a prisoner." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "If I wanted that, you'd be in a basement. Not here, so I'm supposed to thank you?" "No," he said. "You're supposed to survive." That night, when the city outside was wrapped in storm clouds, Antonio told me about his mother. He didn't sit across a desk or keep his usual steel armor. He stood by the window, staring out at the glittering city, voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "I was 15, he said. "My mother was poisoned. By someone we trusted. My father's cousin. Family." The word cracked, sharp with old pain. "She suffered 3 days before the doctors understood what had happened. By then it was too late. After the autopsy, my father handled it. All of them. But the cousin?" His hand clenched white around his glass. "That one was mine." The confession should have terrified me. Instead, it hollowed my chest. Here was a man carved from marble and shadows, confessing that betrayal had shaped his bones. "I'm sorry," I whispered, though sorry felt too small. He turned, and for a heartbeat, the predator was gone. What I saw instead was the 15-year-old boy who had watched his mother die, who had learned that trust was a weapon others could turn against you. "That's why you don't trust anyone," I said softly. "Trust is a luxury," he answered. "One I cannot afford. And yet you trust me enough to keep me here." His gaze lingered. "You warned me when you could have walked away. That means something." Later, in the silence of the guest room, his words spun in my head. Trust is a luxury. But hadn't I trusted him already? Trusted him when I climbed into that sedan instead of running. Trusted him when I whispered the warning that changed everything. I hated myself for it. But I also hated how my chest fluttered when I remembered his eyes in the dark. When he spoke about his mother, when his voice broke for just a second. The line between protection and captivity blurred, and somewhere inside, I knew I was standing on it. The break came days later, when Sophia entered my room holding a folder. She set it on the desk and said nothing, just left. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Inside was a report. Jimmy Harper, 24, delivery driver, La Bella Not, notes about his habits, his routes. A photo clipped to the corner, his driver's license picture. A boyish smile. Jimmy, the sweet kid who used to drop off pizzas at the back door, who always asked about my studies. Dead, executed, on Antonio's orders. My stomach lurched. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it. He was selling information about you, your address, your shifts, even your sister in Montreal. To Ricardo, he didn't know what it would be used for. I shot back. He was just trying to make extra money. Antonio's eyes went cold. Ignorance doesn't erase consequences. I backed away, heart pounding. For the first time, he looked less like my protector and more like the executioner he truly was. You killed him, I whispered, and you expect me to live with that? His face hardened into the mask again, the softness gone. I expect you to live. Full stop. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I should have felt nothing but disgust. Instead, I felt split into half hating him for what he'd done, half aching with the knowledge that without him, I'd likely be dead already. Love and fear had begun to braid together, a rope I couldn't untangle, and deep down, I knew the rope would pull me further into his world, whether I wanted it to or not. By the fourth night, I couldn't breathe inside the penthouse anymore. Every wall pressed too close, every guard's polite nod was another lock snapping shut. The food was exquisite, the sheets soft, the view magnificent, but it all felt like silk-lined shackles, and Jimmy's face haunted me. That smile from his driver's license photo stared back every time I closed my eyes. Sweet, harmless Jimmy, executed because Antonio had decided his usefulness ended. My stomach twisted every time I thought about it. So I made a decision. I waited until Sophia left for what she called her errands. The guards downstairs were trained to watch people coming in, not residents going out. I put on one of the designer coats she'd stocked my closet with, grabbed a tote bag, and walked straight into the elevator like I belonged there. My heart pounded through all 50 floors down to the lobby when the doors opened. The guards at the desk glanced up. For a terrifying second, I thought they'd stop me, but they only nodded politely. Have a good night, Ms. Morgan. I forced a smile and kept walking. By the time I stepped into the icy air of Bay Street, snow swirling under street lamps, my pulse was a drumbeat of freedom. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. Montreal was 4.5 hours away on a Greyhound. I sat near the back of the bus, hugging my tote bag, watching Toronto shrink into nothing in the rear window. The city lights faded, replaced by dark fields and the silver blur of headlights on Highway 401. Every bump in the road rattled my bones. Every passenger who shifted in their seat made me jump. But I told myself it would be worth it, because at the end of this road was my sister Jessica. Jessica lived in a cramped apartment near McGill University, where she was finishing her master's in social work. When I knocked on her door, just after dawn, she opened it in sweatpants, hair in a messy bun, eyes wide with shock. Elena, what the hell, why didn't you tell me you were coming? I needed to get away, I said, forcing a smile I didn't feel. She didn't ask questions. That was Jessica's gift. She hugged me tight and pulled me inside, where the smell of coffee and textbooks wrapped around me like a blanket. For 2 days, we lived like sisters again, arguing about who got the couch blanket, complaining about rent, laughing over cheap takeout. For 2 days, I convinced myself I had escaped. On the third morning, the phone rang. Jessica glanced at the caller ID. Weird. Unknown number. She picked up anyway. I watched her expression shift in an instant from mild annoyance to confusion, then to terror. Her hand shook. The phone slipped from her fingers and clattered across the linoleum floor. Jess, what is it? Her voice cracked. They know about you. Elena, they know you're here. They said they're coming for both of us. Ice filled my veins. I snatched up the phone. Who is this? A man's voice, accented, oily with amusement. Tell Bellucci we have leverage. 48 hours. He brings what we want, or your sister disappears. The line went dead. I barely had time to shout pack a bag before the front door exploded inward. Wood splintered like shrapnel. 3 men stormed in, dressed in tactical black, moving with military precision. Jessica Morgan. The leader said, his smile flashing gold teeth. "You come with us, no." I stepped in front of her, arms out. "Take me. I'm the one you want." The gold-toothed man chuckled. "We want you to watch, to understand what happens when you run from people who own you." One of the others clamped a cloth over Jessica's mouth and nose. She struggled for a few desperate seconds before going limp in his arms. 48 hours. Gold teeth repeated. "You return to Toronto. You tell Bellucci we have his woman's sister. He brings what we want, or she vanishes forever." And then they were gone, leaving the apartment torn apart, the air thick with the acrid smell of chemical sedatives, and me on my knees beside the shattered doorframe. My hands shook so violently, I almost dropped the landline phone as I dialed Antonio's number. He answered on the first ring. "Elena?" "They have Jessica." My voice cracked, raw, 3 beats of silence. Then his voice, colder than I'd ever heard it. "Where are you?" "Montreal." "They said 48 hours. They want territory, respect, something about what you stole." "I'm already in the car," he said. "Send me the address." "Antonio, we'll discuss your decision to run later. Right now, we get your sister back alive." 6 hours later, black SUVs lined Jessica's street like a convoy. Men in suits with earpieces moved with swift, quiet efficiency, turning the quiet student neighborhood into a staging ground for war. Surveillance vans hummed. Drones buzzed. Neighbors peered from behind curtains, mistaking it for some kind of police operation. And then Antonio walked through the door. He didn't shout. He didn't rage at me for running. He simply crossed the room, removed his gloves, and sat beside me on Jessica's couch. His presence was heavy, dangerous, but strangely steadying. "Tell me everything," he said. I told him every detail, every accent, the way the sedative smelled, the tactical precision. My psychology training clicked in, cataloging behaviors, analyzing motives. When I finished, Antonio nodded slowly. "Sinaloa. Ricardo's building alliances. Can you get her back?" I whispered. He met my eyes. For a fleeting second, I saw something close to vulnerability. "I've never lost someone under my protection. I won't start with your sister." The next 12 hours were a blur of strategy and chaos. Antonio's team traced the cartel cell to an abandoned warehouse on Montreal's east side. 8 armed men guarded it. Jessica was inside. The cartel had orders: kill the hostage if they detected a rescue attempt. Standard protocol. Antonio explained, pointing at grainy satellite images. "They expect overwhelming force, so we give them the opposite." "The opposite?" I asked. "Precision, psychology." His gray eyes locked on mine. "That's where you come in." "What?" "You studied behavior. You see tells others miss. Cartel soldiers don't think like Mafia soldiers. They're motivated by fear, not loyalty. Fear can be used." The room tilted. "You want me involved in the rescue? I want you to help us understand how they'll react, whether they'll panic, whether they'll bargain. Your sister's life depends on it." I should have said no. I should have walked away. But Jessica's terrified eyes as she was dragged from her apartment burned inside me. I couldn't do nothing. So I leaned over the maps and whispered, "Here's how fear fractures men." And just like that, I crossed another line deeper into Antonio's world, deeper into his war. The warehouse on the east side of Montreal looked like any other relic of industry. A squat concrete shell with rusted loading bays, broken windows, and graffiti curling across its walls like scars. To anyone passing by, it was just another forgotten building in a neighborhood that the city never bothered to revitalize. But through Antonio's surveillance feed, it was alive with danger. 8 armed men, automatic weapons, orders to kill Jessica if they smelled a rescue. I sat in a dim room lit by screens. A map of the warehouse spread across a scarred oak table. Antonio leaned over it, sleeves rolled, his gray eyes sharp with calculation. His lieutenants Vincent, Marco, and 2 others whose names I didn't catch stood like pillars around him, listening, waiting. And then his gaze shifted to me. "Elena," he said, "tell me what you see." I studied the feeds, the guards pacing, the way they adjusted their grips on their rifles, My criminology lectures rushed back case studies, profiles, behavioral tells. But this wasn't theory anymore. My sister's life hung on whether I could read the room. "They're not disciplined," I murmured. "They're scared. Look at the one at the south entrance, see his pacing? Too fast, too short. Elevated cortisol. He's looking for threats that aren't there. Fear." Antonio's men exchanged glances. I went on. The two on the loading dock, they're posturing. Talking big, laughing too loud, pretending this is routine. But they keep glancing at each other for reassurance. That's weakness. If you hit them first, they'll break. Antonio straightened, his expression unreadable. "And the ones inside?" I swallowed. Jessica was in there with them. They won't kill her immediately. She's leverage. But if they think all is lost, if they believe they're about to die, they'll execute her to deny you victory. The silence that followed was suffocating. Finally, Antonio nodded. "Then we make sure they never reach that conclusion." The plan was surgical. No frontal assault, no explosion of bullets that would guarantee Jessica's death. Instead, Antonio designed a symphony of pressure. His men would create chaos outside, controlled bursts of noise, shadows moving at the perimeter, the illusion of multiple groups closing in. Fear would do the rest. I watched, heart pounding, as the operation unfolded in real time. At a.m. The first distraction detonated, a flashbang in the alley behind the warehouse. Guards shouted, scattering, rifles raised. Another burst crack at the south entrance. The men at the loading dock swore, ducking for cover, their bravado dissolving in seconds through the feed. I saw the cartel leader inside barking orders in rapid Spanish, trying to corral panic into discipline. But panic is a fire that spreads faster than orders. And then Antonio moved. He and Marco slipped in through a forgotten side door that Vincent had pried open. With surgical precision. Inside, the warehouse was a maze of steel beams and stacked pallets. Shadows loomed. Dust floated in the air like ghosts. "Remember," Antonio's voice murmured through my earpiece. Natural movements. Familiar patterns. I crept behind him, every nerve screaming. My hands shook, but I forced myself to breathe. I wasn't trained for this. But Jessica needed me. We reached the interior hall where the hostages were kept. Through a crack between stacked crates, I saw her, Jessica, slumped in a booth, shoved against the wall, wrists zip-tied, eyes glazed from sedatives. My heart clenched, but she was alive. She saw me, and she nodded. "She's conscious enough to follow commands," I whispered. Antonio's voice was calm steel. "Then go." The next 90 seconds stretched into forever. I slipped along the shadows, ducking behind a service counter. A guard's back was turned. His hand trembled on his rifle. Fear. I remembered my training. Unpredictable movements signal threat. Calm signals belonging. So I moved like I belonged. Like a waitress crossing a dining room. Step. Pause. Adjust the hair behind my ear. Step. Straighten a chair. Step. I reached Jessica. Her eyes filled with tears as I crouched, pressing a finger to my lips. I pulled kitchen shears from my tote, the same ones I'd swiped from my station at La Bella not months ago, as if fate had demanded they come with me. With shaking hands, I cut the ties. Her wrists were raw and red. "Lean on me," I whispered. "We're going home." She staggered, her weight heavy but manageable. We slipped into the maintenance corridor, the one I'd spotted earlier on the blueprint. The same route staff once used to haul crates of wine. Every step was a battle against the panic rising in my throat. Behind us, chaos roared. Gunfire cracked. Shouts in Spanish and Italian collided, echoing off steel beams. Antonio's team clashed with cartel soldiers, but I forced myself forward, dragging Jessica toward the exit. The tunnel was cramped, lined with pipes and peeling paint. She stumbled twice, but adrenaline kept her moving. And finally we burst into the cold night behind a deli 3 blocks away. Vincent was there with an SUV idling, headlights off. He opened the back door, and I pushed Jessica inside. Secure, I breathed into the earpiece. "Jessica's safe," Vincent gave a sharp nod. "Good," because Ricardo just walked into the kitchen. Every instinct screamed at me to stay, to keep Jessica safe. To run until Montreal was only a smear of memory. But something stronger pulled me back. Antonio was inside, alone. I turned. The warehouse loomed like a monster against the night, Elena, what are you doing? Vincent's voice chased me. My job, I whispered, and I ran. Inside the warehouse kitchen, it was hell. Muzzle flashes lit the stainless steel. Pots and pans clattered to the floor. Shadows danced like devils on tile walls. But at the center of it, two figures faced each other. Ricardo Torres. Antonio Bellucci. Ricardo held a kitchen knife, grip tight, eyes gleaming with manic fury. Antonio held a butcher's cleaver, its weight steady in his hand. You made it personal when you took her sister, Antonio's voice thundered. I made it profitable. Ricardo sneered. Your attachment is weakness. Weakness your enemies will always exploit. They circled each other, predators in a cage. The fight was brutal. Ricardo was faster, younger, slashing wild arcs with the knife. Antonio was slower, but precise. He didn't waste movement. He let Ricardo's fury burn itself out. When Ricardo overextended on a thrust, Antonio caught his wrist, twisted until bone snapped with a sickening crack. Ricardo howled, dropping the knife. The cleaver came down in a blur, striking with surgical accuracy. Ricardo Torres died as he had lived violently, without honor, sprawled across a stainless steel counter. For a long moment, Antonio stood over him, chest heaving, cleaver clenched in white-knuckled fists. And then he lifted his eyes and found me in the doorway. You should be with your sister, he said. Voice ragged. She's safe, I whispered. Vincent has her. Then why are you here? I stepped closer, over broken utensils and spilled blood, until I stood within reach of him. Because this is where it started. In a kitchen. Me serving you wine. You protecting me from things I didn't see. It's only right that it ends here. He dropped the cleaver with deliberate care. His hands, bloodied and strong, rose to frame my face with surprising gentleness. It's not ending. Elena, he murmured. His storm-gray eyes softened, for once unguarded. It's just beginning. Outside, police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. But Antonio's cleanup crew was already erasing the battlefield, like ghosts sweeping away footprints in snow. Come, he said, threading his fingers through mine. We leave together. And for the first time, I didn't fight the pull. 2 years had passed, but sometimes it still felt like I was standing in that kitchen in Montreal. The stainless steel counters splattered with blood. Antonio's cleaver gleaming in the dim light. Ricardo Torres crumpled at his feet. That night had ended one war, but it had begun another, the slow, invisible battle inside me. Between the woman who had whispered a warning in a restaurant and the woman who now carried Antonio Bellucci's last name. I stood in the boardroom of Bellucci Hospitality Consulting, a company that existed on paper as a restaurant empire, but in reality was so much more. 6 men sat nervously across from me, each in an expensive suit, each trying to disguise their sweat as I leafed through their psychological evaluations. They weren't here for jobs as servers or sommeliers. They were candidates for the family. Behind the one-way glass, I knew Antonio was watching. He always did, letting me be the one to ask the questions while he judged the way they flinched, the way they breathed, the way they lied. Mr. Castellano, I said, turning to the youngest of the group. During the loyalty section, your micro-expressions suggested deception, lip compression, decreased eye contact. Tell me about your gambling debts. The man's face blanched, his hands clenched, betraying nervous energy. I can explain, no need, I interrupted. Acknowledging the debt shows integrity. Hiding it would disqualify you. But it also means you're better suited for customer relations than security. Loyalty to family outweighs loyalty to money, but the temptation is still a liability. I scribbled notes as he exhaled in relief. 3 of the 6 men would be eliminated today. The other 3 would be woven into the machinery of the empire Antonio and I were building together. When the interviews ended, my phone buzzed with a text. Just 2 words, impressive as always. I allowed myself the faintest smile. That afternoon, I sat in the doctor's office, Antonio's hand clasping mine with unusual tightness. The ultrasound screen glowed, fuzzy gray lines forming the outline of a tiny figure. For months, Dr. Martinez said warmly, "Everything looks healthy." I turned my head, watching Antonio. His composure, always so flawless, cracked just slightly when the doctor pointed out fingers, toes, a flickering heartbeat. For a moment, He wasn't the calculating boss of a criminal empire. He was just a man staring at his daughter's first photograph. "Have you thought about names?" the doctor asked. "Isabella," Antonio answered immediately. I squeezed his hand. I knew the name. His mother's name. The room blurred with unshed tears. That night, after dinner in our mansion north of Toronto, a sprawling estate surrounded by stone walls and forests patrolled by guards, I stood at the window of our bedroom. Beyond the glass, the training facility's floodlights burned against the snow, where tomorrow's recruits would be drilled in surveillance, counter-surveillance, defensive driving, and behavioral profiling. Inside, Antonio wrapped his arms around me from behind, one broad hand covering the slight swell of my stomach. His breath was warm against my ear. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. I thought of the girl I used to be, the waitress balancing plates at La Bella Not, who laughed with Carmen, who worried about bills more than bullets, the girl who believed good and evil were lines you could draw neatly in ink. That girl would have been horrified by who I had become, but she was gone. "None," I said, and I meant it. I was no longer Elena Morgan. I was Dr. Elena Bellucci, psychologist, strategist, consigliere, wife. My degrees hung on the office walls as perfect camouflage. I still wrote academic papers, still lectured occasionally at conferences. But now those papers doubled as cover for my real work, identifying traitors before they could betray us, weeding out infiltrators, advising Antonio which alliances were safe and which were suicide. When law enforcement came sniffing, they found nothing but a successful restaurant empire and a respected behavioral consultant. They never looked beneath the marble floors, never asked why our dining rooms had the best security cameras in the city. My sister Jessica had healed, though the kidnapping left scars she tried to bury under her social work in Montreal. She had stood beside me at my wedding, the maid of honor with eyes that said both "I love you" and "I don't understand you." She still didn't approve of Antonio, but she trusted that I had chosen this life with eyes open, and I had. One evening, as snow fell thick and silent outside, Antonio entered my office holding a velvet box. "For you," he said. Inside lay sapphire earrings surrounded by diamonds, elegant, beautiful. But when I touched them, I noticed the faint seam of hidden technology, tracking devices. Antonio admitted. "Waterproof, battery life, 6 months. With them, I'll always know where you are." I put them on anyway. Beauty and function, love and surveillance. That was our life now. Later that night, we sat by the fire, reading reports together. Antonio's empire had expanded 12 restaurants across Ontario and Quebec, all legitimate businesses on paper, all double functioning as meeting hubs for the family. Our revenues soared. Our enemies fell one by one, often quietly, sometimes violently. I'd learned to stop flinching at those reports. 2 years in Antonio's world had taught me that violence was just another tool, no different from money or contracts. I'd compartmentalized it, folded it into a box labeled necessary. Antonio set his papers aside and studied me. "You know, Elena, when I first met you, I thought you were a waitress with sharp eyes. Now I see you were always more than that. You were meant for this." His hand brushed mine. For the first time, I didn't argue. Our reflection shimmered in the glass of the window. A mafia boss and his psychologist wife, rulers of an empire dressed in silk and steel. And at the center of it all, Isabella, kicking inside me, waiting to be born into a world I once swore I'd never enter. I pressed a hand to my stomach. "What kind of life will she have?" "The kind where she's safe," Antonio said. His eyes, for once, softened without shadow. "Safer than either of us ever were." I wanted to believe him, and maybe I did, because somewhere along the way, fear had given way to something else, something stronger. Something far more dangerous. Love for a man who killed without hesitation. Love for the empire we had built. Love for the future we had claimed together. Outside, Toronto pulsed with oblivious life. The city had no idea how much of its skyline, its restaurants, its networks of power now belonged to us. Inside, Antonio kissed my temple, and Isabella shifted under my palm as if in answer. The waitress who once whispered, "Stay quiet, don't move," was gone. In her place stood a woman who no longer whispered, a woman who ruled.